Our next faculty member to speak is Clinical Assistant Professor Kristin Fontichiaro, who will be sharing her experience with Michigan Makers and Makerspace, another initiative for Information Impact Project. Kristin.
I'll just start by saying we have late breaking news that we have 2 other projects for 501 in Jackson, one of which is working directly with the Office of the Ombudsman, whose responsibility is, he's sort of the linchpin between citizens who have concerns and the various agencies. And they are actually allowing first semester master students to work with the Ombudsman and interview people like the mayor and the police chief about how that communication can be more effective so problems can get solved more quickly. So we're really excited about that. Speaking of 501, in both 501 and 502 this week, you've heard about the Raspberry Pi, the $35 mini computer. And that's where I want to start talking about Michigan Makers. You may, if you are into techno gadgets, have seen that there was a huge excitement leading up to the days of the release of Raspberry Pi. And some of us used to stay after class and talk about what would happen with children if computers cost $35. How would that open up access? How would that open up opportunities? How would it make it possible for kids to be able to drop and break things without getting in trouble? And so Sam Roseland and Terrence O'Neill and Shauna Mazura and I would stand around talking about this, and these conversations led to conversations about a school where one of our alums was then working, where Rachel Goldberg had, because she saw kids in her middle school who wanted to learn how to program, she would on Sundays teach herself Python and on Mondays go teach it to students. And we thought maybe there was a way to connect this alumni work with our interests. So none of us quite remember how we went from having these big ideas to actually having a program. And over the summer, we noodled about things like STEM education, which you hear about in the news a lot, science, technology, engineering, and math, or what for us eventually evolved into STEAM education, which is science, technology, engineering, art and aesthetics, and math. So our kids aren't just making stuff, they're making stuff that has a visual appeal. I knew that kids like my own nephew were in schools that no longer had time for tinkering or puttering or making stuff. So what if we could put all of our interests and all of our motivations together? Our initial team grew into a weekly pop-up makerspace at the middle school in the library that involved 10 UMSI, or in Lampyland, UMSI, students as mentors, 40 middle schoolers as makers, our alum is the in-school partner, and me as the faculty member. What's really interesting about going to a middle school, besides the fact that you realize there is life after middle school and you are living it, is that the hectic pace of class almost melts away for our mentors during this time. Our mentors both mirror the participants' existing interests, and they came to us with interest in things like programming. We had one kid who would say all year, "Is this the week we do batch coding?" And every year we would say, "No." And then every week we would say, "Does anybody on this team know what batch coding is?" No. Does anybody want to learn? Not this week. They were also interested in things like comics drawing, and they were also interested in building stuff out of recycled materials. And we could also not only mirror those interests, but open these windows to them of other things that they might not have known about, like Arduino microcontrollers, Creative Commons, board game design, and other skills that mirror those of the diverse mentors that work with them. I will say that one of the most unexpectedly popular events, and I'm sure they are available for hire, was learning how to wrap presents and having a contest who could wrap the cornucopia best. If that's not using people and information and technology in more valuable ways, what is? The middle schoolers are at a real pivotal time in their identity development. And if you remember your years between about ages 11 and 14, it's a time where there's a real push to feel like you want to be part of the crowd and be normal and do what everybody else does, but you have these interests that are kind of quirky. And it was really important that we have a safe creative space where they could putter with like-minded kids, and more importantly, with like-minded mentors who could validate their interests. As I wondered about how to explain Michigan Makers to each of you, I recalled a letter that one of our participants wrote at the end of the school year. So while our students were taking exams, their last act of creativity was they wrote letters of recommendation for the Michigan Makers. So she writes, "I am writing about Michigan Makers, an after-school program at East Middle School. In Michigan Makers, you learn differently than you would in a regular classroom. You learn about how to make an endless list of things. Makers learn how to work with programs like Scratch. They also learn about things that other makers around the world have created, like Arduinos and the Raspberry Pi. Makers learn about other concepts like board game design, conductive clay, 3D printing. Interesting because our 3D printer was broken the entire year, so they mostly learned from Terrence that sometimes things break and it's really interesting to try to figure out how to fix them. Making comics and sewing, remarkably popular with boys, sewing machines are. With all these things, you are free to use your creativity in coming up with your own creations. But it's much more than that. Along the way, you learn about teamwork and problem solving. You meet other people who have completely different brains and ideas and thoughts, and who have the same interest in making that you do. The graduate students come every week to our school. They were very patient and endured all of our questions." Batch coding. "They made the learning fun and actually learned with us too. The students encouraged us to step out of what we were used to doing. We could show our projects and creations to them and they would give us helpful feedback. They would give us their honest viewpoints, what was great and what we could fix. They didn't teach us by handing us textbooks and assignments. All year she talked about how we didn't give her textbooks. They taught us by guiding us, then letting us figure out things out on our own and solve problems in our own way. The main thing I got out of Michigan Makers is a love of making. I met fascinating people. I got an understanding of how to use different programs and new skills. I also got many more ideas for cool projects I could work on in the future. A school or library or community center or company should hire these graduate students because they can make anything possible. Sincerely, Himija." So many of you know how much I like to quote the school's original mission statement of connecting people, information, and technology in more valuable ways. And as our mission has morphed over time into we create and share knowledge so people will use information with technology to build a better world, the Michigan Makers are proud to help kids get in on the ground floor and grateful to UMSI for the support. And it all started with the Raspberry Pi. So please come and join us, especially if you know what batch coding is. Thank you.